If statements in MATLAB are one of the three most important programming aspects we're going to talk about, together with for loops and while loops. And for all of these, we're not going to work with any of them in the command window. We're always going to work with them in a script or in a function. So usually it'll be in a function, so let me do that. So to introduce if statements, what I want to do is I want to write a function that's the same as the absolute value function. So why is that a natural thing to consider for an if statement? It's because the absolute value function is a piecewise function. For negative x, you do one thing. For non-negative x, you do something else. So one good way to get a computer to do that is to use an if statement. So I don't want to use the name ABS for absolute value because that's what is already built into MATLAB. So let me just choose a random name like fn1 for function 1. My input I'm going to call x. My output I'm going to call y. And then here is how if statements look in MATLAB. I type if x is less than 0, so if x is negative. Okay, then what kind of output do I want? Say I input -6. What output do I want? I want +6. And what's the formula for that? Well, if you think about it, the formula is you want to negate the negative number to make it positive. So you might notice some asymmetry here. I have a semicolon at the end of this line so that nothing gets printed to the screen, but I don't have a semicolon at the end of this line. I could have it if I wanted, like this, but here MATLAB's even alerting me that it's not necessary. It says extra semicolon is unnecessary in an if statement before the new line. So it's just saying on this particular line where it starts with the word if, you don't need a semicolon. So if I wanted to just finish off the if statement, I should finish it with the word end, E-N-D. So this end goes with the if statement. This end down here goes with the function. But so far this isn't enough. I also want to tell it what should y be if x is not negative. And here's another asymmetry in if statements. After the word if, you always have to have some true-false expression, but after the word else, you never have a true-false expression. After the word else, what comes next is just what you do if the previous thing was false. So here what I'm going to put in is if the input is 0 or positive, then the output is just the same thing for this absolute value function I'm writing. So now I'm going to save it. I save it with the same name as my function name, same file name as my function name. Now I go back to the command window and let's test it. Function 1 of -3 is +3. That looks good. Function 1 of 10.2, does it work for decimals? Yep, that looks good. And when you're testing functions that you've written, if you think there might be some boundary case, always good to test that. So 0 is an obvious number that I might have made a mistake for, but in this case it works. If instead I had wanted to have some statement after this word else, then how would I do it? Then I could say else if, okay, let's try it like this. Else if x is greater than 0, then y equals x. So I made a little mistake here because right now I haven't accounted for the case 0. So now let's test it out. I'm going to save it. If I do function 1 of -3, that still works. Function 1 of 10.2, that still works. Function 1 of 0, well, it didn't give me an error message, but nothing happened. So why is that? Well, I evaluated function 1 at 0. Okay, 0 inside the parentheses. So that's like saying x is 0 for this execution of the function. Then it asks, is 0 less than 0? No, it's not, so it just skips this part. Is 0 greater than 0? No, it's not, so it just skips this part. And because I don't have an else statement, it just continues to the end. If I wanted something that works for, then make sure that it executes as long as this one is false and this one is false, then I would have an else here. Okay, so I could display neither executed. And I made a mistake here. What mistake did I make? The mistake I made was I didn't tell it that this is a string. I'm supposed to do that by putting it inside of single quotation marks. Okay, so if both of these are false, then this is what's going to come up. It's going to display neither executed. So let me go back to the command window and test it. I can get my last command by hitting the up arrow. Okay, so there you can see it displays neither executed. I can have as many else if statements as I want. For example, I could have else if x equals 0. Okay, and then in that case, let's set y to be 0. Okay, so I've saved it. Now let's run it again. Okay, so now it outputs 0.